But the tactical approach, how do you best use the drone during a fire scenario and a search and rescue operation? Depending on the terrain, your flight patterns dramatically change. And so the tactical approach training is absolutely key.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 115. Are you wondering how local organizations can add drones to their public safety response systems? Well, hang on, because today's guest has a wealth of information to share. Romeo Durscher is the Director of Education at DJI, the world's largest manufacturer of consumer drones. Many public safety organizations have begun to adopt drone technology. As Director of Education, Romeo works closely with many of these agencies to advance the use of drones during life and property-saving operations. Romeo has also established himself as one of the top aerial panorama photographers in the world, traveling to various locations and capturing some of the most stunning and inspiring views from above. Romeo is here to talk about the use of drones by police and fire agencies. He'll also give us some tips on taking great aerial images, and he'll share an amazing story of flying DJI drones and broadcasting live on ABC Good Morning from inside the world's largest cave in Vietnam. Before we hear from Romeo, Interdrone 2017 will be held in Las Vegas from September 6th through the 8th. This is the largest fully dedicated commercial drone event of the year, so make plans to attend now. Romeo will be speaking at this event, and he'll tell us about his session later in this interview. Receive $100 off the cost when you use the discount code RADIO. Go to interdrone.com for details and to register for this exciting event. Now, if you like the Drone Radio Show and you want to do a good thing, consider donating to my funding campaign on Patreon. You can join this effort and get some cool stuff by going to patreon.com/Drone Radio Show. Now let's hear how drones can be integrated into local public safety response systems with Romeo Durscher. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Romeo to introduce himself.
My name is Romeo Durscher, and I'm the Director of Education here at DJI. And we look at education as one of the more important areas in this entire new industry because it takes education across a variety of different areas. From the everyday user, the person that goes and gets a drone and then wants to start flying it, we want to help this individual using the technology safely and in a manner that is acceptable with local laws, regulations, and, also expectations.
So do you design the education programs for DJI?
This is not just a one-man project. There are several teams involved that help with education, that help with the creation of materials that can help any pilot from a beginner to an intermediate to even an advanced one. So we are putting more focus on that educational component, and mostly right now we're putting focus on tutorials, short tutorials about certain topics that can range from how to use the technology to what is available within our DJI Go app, because it's a very powerful application that we use to interface with our technology. And there are so many little tricks and things embedded in that application that we decided we're going to do more focused tutorials for our users. So that's quite exciting. But then we also realized that now that we are getting more and more into the commercial sector, that we also need education there. So it's not just the consumer now, it's also the commercial side. And then, of course, changing public perception was also originally a big goal through education, because especially here in the United States, over the last several years, we've seen a change in the way people think about just the term drone. What used to be a very, oh my goodness, this is a military tool, has really become more acceptable. And that's partly because we're really trying to showcase how this technology can help pretty much everyone at some point. And then, of course, we want to also get the technology into academia so that students and educators and researchers can utilize the technology as well as the software that runs on it or with it to help either inspire the next generation or help with research projects. So academia is definitely one of the big focuses for us as well.
You know, when you talk about how the perception has changed, I sort of see that we're moving into a new phase. In the first phase, people looked at drones as destructive. Then in the second phase, it was drones are good. Now I think we're moving into a phase of drones have value, where people accept that they're good, but they want to know what can they do with them that will enhance their lives.
That's very true. And yes, absolutely. And it's very fascinating to see this because if we go back in history, there have been other technologies that were invented and introduced and that created some sort of skepticism and concern. But as a society, we were always able to overcome those concerns. And I foresee the same happening here with this technology because we're seeing more and more value added and real life impactful applications that these machines can create.
How long have you been with DJI?
So I have been with DJI almost 3 years now. It seems so much longer, but that's probably because this technology is moving so fast. I used to work on a space mission, on a NASA space mission. And, you know, back then that was always my big dream as a boy to work on a space exploration mission. To me, that was just the ultimate. And I spent almost 13 years doing that. I did not think I could find a job or a field that would be more challenging and more fun than working on a space mission. But boy, was I wrong. And of course, you know, back in 2010 and 2011, when I started to work with some of the drone technology, I had no idea that this would become so big. So it's quite fascinating.
Which NASA mission were you working on?
I was part of the NASA Solar Dynamics Observatory, which is a spacecraft that we built to observe the sun and really gather a lot of data of the sun, looking at the sun with different, in essence, filters to see different layers of the sun, different temperatures, and through that learn and understand the workings of the sun a little bit more. And it's actually quite important these days because we have so much technology that we rely on, from, you know, your cell phone with GPS and cellular connectivity to satellites orbiting our Earth. A solar event, a solar storm could potentially disrupt our environment dramatically to the point where we could be without communications or without power for not only days but weeks, because a solar storm could potentially take out an entire power grid. And so for us to understand how does the sun work and how can we predict solar events a little bit further out is key, especially with the development in technology.
So when did you become interested in drones?
So what happened was my best friend, Mark Johnson, he does a lot of forensics analysis work. And he sometimes has to go out onto intersections. They had just had a really bad accident and scan intersections or get aerial footage from satellite of a certain area. And he always was trying to look for better solutions. And back in 2011, more solutions came on the market in forms of these kind of helicopter-looking devices, but they were not quite helicopters. They had an additional rotor or two, but they had the ability to fly, hover, and you could just put a little camera underneath. So together we started exploring with some of these really early technologies that were available on commercial market, but they were expensive and they were really hard to put together. Most of them had no English manual. Most of these machines came from China. And it was really quite fascinating to work with this technology because I'd always loved flying remote-controlled airplanes. But now we had this device that was somewhat hovering at the time. And then suddenly, this first Phantom 1 came out. And boy, did that change everything. That was late 2012. We got our hands on it. And for us, it changed the way we thought about it, this technology, because now you had something that hovered, that was easy to put together. You added an action camera on the bottom of it, and you would get the images you needed to do a variety of different projects.
I interviewed Mark in a previous podcast and found what he was doing to be really interesting.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And I mean, his job has gotten so much easier with this technology.
What do you remember about making the switch from NASA to DJI?
So after Mark and I spent 5 weeks traveling with a drone and really trying to see what can we do with a drone, what kind of pictures can we get, doing some creative work with drones, that really kind of piqued my interest to potentially someday maybe work in the drone industry. And I met several people along the way that were also very into drones. And one thing led to another, and I was presented with the offer to head on education at DJI. And it wasn't an easy decision because, on one hand, you have space exploration, you're working on a NASA mission that's providing some really cool things. But then on the other hand, you have this new technology that is now emerging, and there are so many possibilities, but there are also so many challenges. And I wasn't quite sure which route to go, which way should I take, the easy one, the one that I've been living for the last 12 and a half years, or should I go this really crazy path into the drone industry? And I decided, you know what, now is the time. This is something so cool, so impactful, and I joined DJI.
What were some of the early roles that you had with DJI?
So when I joined the team here in Northern California in the Bay Area, it was a very small team at the time. We had just all established an office here. So the first several months, it was about settling into an office, creating somewhat of an outline of what it is that we will be doing out of this area here. So the challenges were that you have a technology that is exploding. So many people were getting into drones. DJI was making such great moves with new products. It was really difficult to keep up at first. But then I realized that with the Phantom 3, when it was announced and then finally also deployed, that we had reached a point where the technology has become good enough to start being implemented in humanitarian as well as public safety operations. And that's when I decided I want to learn more about this segment, because in a year or in two, fire departments and humanitarian organizations would be using this technology. And that started my drive to learn more about public safety. That was almost 2 years ago. And about a year and a half ago, we started a partnership with the European Emergency Number Association, ENA. And through ENA, we really wanted to see how would a fire department or a search and rescue unit use the technology, implement it. What were the challenges, the problems they would come across? And how could we solve some of these issues? And we chose Europe because at the time, the regulatory environment here in the United States that was pre-107 was just not conducive enough to say, okay, let's do some tests here in the US. So we went to Europe, where it was much easier for a public safety department to utilize the technology at the time. And then sure enough, in later part of 2015, 16, here in the United States, 107 got implemented. That, of course, also allows public safety to start utilizing drones. Of course, there are additional steps that they have to go through, but the whole process became simpler. And so we started also working with public safety entities here in the US to really gather data on how they use it, what they use it for, what is needed, and how can we make our products more suitable for that vertical.
In regard to using drones in public safety, especially for fire suppression, what were some of the key challenges that you had to overcome?
Well, early on, I mean, we immediately realized a few things pretty much right off the bat, that no matter what, the technology has to be as easy as possible to operate, because these are firefighters. They're trained to work fire incidents. They are not pilots or drone operators. And so that was lesson number one, was it has to be easy and it has to work. So from there, then we started seeing other trends that came through. For example, the operator actually also became the data bottleneck, because the way our products at the time were set up was that you have the operator that looks at a smart device and sees what the drone sees. But that data is only right there at the operator's hand. And incident command may be right next to the operator, maybe 100 yards or maybe even a couple miles away. And so you had a data bottleneck. So we had to start thinking of ways to overcome all of that. So very early on, we really got a good sense of what would be needed to really make this a fantastic tool. And on the flip side, just having a aerial perspective of an incident was already a huge benefit for a fire department. So while it was not perfect, it already provided something they normally didn't have before.
I think a lot of people see the value in using drones, but how do you handle the need to get them integrated into an organization's incident command?
What needs to happen, and what we're seeing happening now, is that the drone, in essence, broadcasts the footage straight to incident command and also gets integrated into incident command management software. So what we're seeing in public safety in general is that more cameras, more data streams are coming into incident command. That could be, body cams that are worn, or a cam on a helmet, to handheld cameras, even cameras for traffic surveillance. Surveillance is not the right word, but when we have these cameras along the highways that look at traffic buildup, every piece of information that an incident commander can have access to could potentially be of extreme value. So these incident management software packages are now designed to take in streams from a lot of different sources, including the drone.
How about integrating drones into training programs? Because as you know, what first responders train on is typically what they'll go to when they have an actual emergency.
Exactly. And you bring up a very, very good topic, and that's training. And one of the things that we've also learned through all of this is the importance of training, because the technology itself has gotten fairly simple, that it's easy to take off and put the drone into a position, and for the next 30 minutes have the drone there just looking at an incident. But we need to do proper training, and fire departments and search and rescue units, even law enforcement, they need to go through the proper training of not only deployment and knowing what the regulatory environment looks like, but the tactical approach. How do you best use the drone during a fire scenario and a search and rescue operation? Depending on the terrain, your flight patterns dramatically change. And so the tactical approach training is absolutely key. And what we're seeing right now, and that's a very fascinating development, is that we're seeing all these training organizations pop up that start training public safety. And while this is a great thing, there's also a challenge, because what are they training towards? As of right now, there is no national standard, although one is currently being developed that will help with national standards, so that a fireman in San Diego gets the same type of training as a fireman in Tampa. And so then it becomes really valuable that you have this standardized training across the United States in not only 107 and COA applications, but the tactical approach during an incident.
What are some of the things that agencies need to consider if they're thinking about bringing drones into a public safety program?
There are several things that help. One is understand that you do not have to reinvent the wheel. And I think that's an important one. There are numerous public safety entities here in the United States that have gone through the process of establishing a UAV program and are willing to share the lessons learned. And that to me is exciting, that we have within this vertical, we have leaders that are willing to share what they have learned. So other departments don't have to go through the process of reinventing the wheel. So that's number one. Number two is, no matter what, you have to ensure that you're following local laws, regulations, and really going through the process of ensuring that your pilots have the certifications that are needed, have the training, and then also to be as transparent as possible about your activities. For example, highlight when you use a drone and how you use the drone. There is a really great Instagram account that I personally enjoy from one of the police departments here in California. And they pretty much every day update the account with how they are using the drone, what they have trained on, and what they're using it for in the field. And to me, that's just a sign of transparency.
Yeah, I think all of those are great. Now, I'd like to transition away from public safety for a minute and talk about some of the other things that you're involved with. I thought I saw where you're doing something with drones and art. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So I started using drones to create aerial art. Very early on, I realized that getting that perspective from 30, 50, 100 feet above is so cool, and you can really see your environment from a different perspective. Because, for over 100 years, we've been taking pictures from eye level. Sure, once in a while, people get on an airplane or a helicopter and they do some aerial photography, but most everyone had only been taking pictures from an eye level perspective. And now we have this easy, accessible technology that allows you to see your environment from a totally different perspective. And so I got totally into this aerial photography project, and I started doing aerial panoramas and having a lot of fun with creating really beautiful views. And so more and more, I started to challenge myself and also other people's thinking on what can be done with this technology, from long exposure shots. Now that we have technology that stays fairly solid in one spot in the sky, we can do long exposure. We can look at our environment from a very, very different perspective with very unorthodox type of setups. We learned in photography school that if you do a long exposure shot, you would never, ever touch your camera. You would use, a remote device to trigger the exposure. You would stand away as far as possible so you couldn't bump your tripod. And now we have a flying device that is 200 feet in the air, taking a 4-second long exposure shot. I mean, that is so cool, and you can create so much fun stuff with it, so that whenever I have an opportunity, I talk about that aspect. And at InnerDrone, I will have a class about being extra creative in the sky.
Were you trained as a photographer, or did you develop the techniques after learning to fly?
A little bit of both. I had a photography class back during my college days, and I always enjoyed photography, but I had to kind of relearn all of it in the sky. And here's a really great example. I used to teach a aerial photography workshop in Santa Fe, and it's a week-long workshop where somebody who just wants to become an aerial photographer comes to, learns how to fly, and then learns how to operate the camera. But everybody who came through there, they had the hardest time grasping the fact that you can just point your camera straight down and take an incredible picture, because we are trained in one way of taking an image, and with a ground camera, we rarely point it straight to the ground. Yet up in the sky, we have so many more options, and we kind of have to retrain our brain to take advantage of what is really available. So it was a combination of learning in school, but then really also learning by using the technology and changing my mindset a little bit.
When people come to you and say they want to take a better aerial image, what do you say to them?
There's a couple of things. Something that keeps working for me is when I go to a new place, I usually get myself familiarized with the area. And, these days with Google Maps, it's so easy to get an idea of what the area looks like. But what I have discovered is I sometimes go with an idea to take a picture of something and end up seeing something completely different just right next to it. And I think that's the beauty of aerial photography. You take the platform up in the air, you spend a little time of just looking around. Maybe there are patterns that you didn't know existed, or maybe there is a beautiful play of shadows. So if you just invest a little time in exploring your surrounding and not just focus on that one objective you had, I think you will be very surprised at what you can get.
Do you look at the world differently now because of your work with drones?
Actually, yes, because I'm a sucker for clouds. I love weather. And so I can be driving somewhere and then I see these clouds and I look up and I think to myself, oh, I wish I could just fly a drone right now. Because clouds to me are so beautiful from that perspective. And that's another thing. We tend to, when we're flying, to look straight down at the ground, when in essence, the 30% above the horizon can be as interesting, if not more. So it really provides me with an opportunity to see something from a completely different perspective. And if I can capture something from above and above the drone, like tilting my camera just 30% up, I get so much more sky in my picture. And that may be the big draw in my final product.
That's pretty neat. Now, when you look back at all of the opportunities you've had flying drones, what would you say has been your most memorable moment?
There have been many, but one that really stands out is a couple of years ago, I was part of the ABC Good Morning America project going to central Vietnam inside the world's largest cave, Son Dong. And from there, we did a live TV broadcast, flying the drone through the cave and broadcasting the footage from the drone live from Vietnam to the United States. And that 2 years ago was a tremendous accomplishment. And being inside this massive cave, flying a drone and exploring this area was truly mesmerizing. It was extremely challenging, not only mentally, but also physically. We had 90% humidity and it was hot in that cave. We lived in the cave for 10 days at a time. And it was really challenging, but the beauty of it was just fascinating. And I have such fond memories.
Now, I imagine that the live shot was not necessarily the first time you flew the drone in the cave. I'm sure you had some practice flights. So do you remember what it was like the first few times you flew it in the cave?
Oh, yes, I still remember because you're absolutely right. So we went on a scouting trip first to see if it's even possible to do all of this. And we were in the first of the two caves, which is the Hang En cave. And that's the third largest one in the world. And my first 3 or 4 flights, I honestly thought I was a beginner. It actually started to get to my head and I got concerned that I would not be able to pull this off because everything is so different flying in a cave. Yes, you have a big cave, but just judging your perception, how close or how far away are you, so difficult. And of course, you don't have GPS, so you're flying completely differently, and you have all these different thermal activities in a cave. So your machine is being pushed left and right, up and down, but then you have this amazing gimbal system that stabilizes the footage, so you don't even realize, looking at the footage, that you are being thrown around up there. So the first couple of times flying in there, I was shaky, and it was already hot, but I was sweating extra just because it was such a different environment. But then, you start to get used to it, and after about 7, 8, 9 flights, I regained my confidence, and it was an amazing experience.
So for the live shot, did you get to the point where you felt like it was a routine flight? Or did the adrenaline surge as soon as the director said go?
The adrenaline definitely surged, not only because, in the back of your mind, you do know that now it's time to perform. Everything before was just a practice run. Now you got to do it. But in our case, it was even more interesting because like 2 minutes before we went live, a storm just swooped over the cave. And we had 3 different channels. We had a satellite dish with 3 channels. One channel for the camera that is being used on the ground, then one for the drone camera, and the third for communications to the studio. And the communication channel kept going in and out. So we were not sure when we were live and when we were not live. So we had to be, in essence, just flying and shooting and quickly come back for battery changes and go right back up again. And so it was a challenge not to be in comm with the studio. But luckily, after maybe 10, 15 minutes, communications got reestablished, and then things started to settle in.
Yeah, I've seen the video a few times, and it's just really amazing to see that whole experience unfold.
It really was. And it's one of those things where, it's total teamwork. The drone was one tool that was used, and it's, an amazing tool for media, but it takes truly a team and a village to make something like this happen. And it was really an attest to the technology at the time, 2 years ago, and also the will to push through for ABC to take the risk and say, yes, we want to do a project like that. I always say that was probably not an easy decision to make, but boy, did that change the way we think of using technology in ways that we had never seen before.
Yeah, exactly. Now you're going to be at Interdrone this year. Can you share what you'll be talking about?
Yes, I'm excited. Interdrone is one of my favorite conferences of the year, and I get to see quite a few conferences around the world, but Interdrone has always been a special conference to me. First of all, it's in Las Vegas. Las Vegas brings everyone together. So I get to see many of my friends from around the world, and they come to Las Vegas. So that's already nice. And this year, I'm going to do more an artistic class, which is about aerial photography and how to be extra creative and stand out. And I'm going to be really focusing more on not only how to take images, but what can you do once you have the images? What are some of the processes that I use to make my images stand out, to be creative, maybe create a little planet or a tiny planet or a bent image, or add a motion to a still image, stuff like that. I really want to showcase some of the things that I enjoy doing. And hopefully some people will find this interesting to improve upon their techniques. There is no right or wrong. At the end of the day, if you as the artist like what you did, that's what matters to me. I'm not here to please others. I like to be pleased in this particular instance. So hopefully I can share some of those ideas of how to use post-production techniques to have some fun. And then on the public safety side, I'm going to be talking about the day a fireman became a drone pilot. I like that title because it really is starting to change the scene of a fire department, not only because of our technology, but more and more technologies are coming into public safety. And firemen are doing more than just holding a hose and putting out a fire. They're now learning about all these different technologies. And of all the technologies so far, the drone has been the most fun for them to learn because there's a little kid in all of us. And so I'm going to be talking about our experiences working with fire and search and rescue units. What have we learned through our partnerships? Where are we today? And what will the future be? And so I think this is going to be an interesting discussion. And I definitely love sharing some of the insights that I have collected. I don't know everything and I don't have all the answers. But if we just look back at what we have accomplished over the last couple of years already, I think it's safe to say that this technology will continue to have a direct and beneficial impact to public safety and therefore also the public by itself.
Yeah, I think they're going to be great sessions. Before we close, I'd like to come back to the public safety area for a moment and get your opinion on something that's been in the news lately. And it has to do with people flying their drones during emergency situations, most notably the forest fires out west interfering with the work of first responders?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that I have to say is don't be trigger happy. That's the best way to describe it. People see, oh, there's a column of smoke, or there is a car accident, or, oh, I heard that this person is missing and they're looking for this person over here. Don't just put your drone up for either the goodwill of trying to help or the sensational need to get a great image or a video that then can go viral. Those are both needs and wants that could potentially cause issues not only to yourself, but to the public safety entities trying to solve that situation. So keep your drones grounded. If you're there and you think you have a value that you could add, look for somebody in charge, look for incident command, see if they need assistance, check with local authorities first. And even if a fireman says, oh yeah, we could totally use the drone, put it up, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are allowed to do that by law. So make sure that you have proper clearance, that you know what you're doing, and you're not a hindrance for firefighters or public safety officials, because that only puts a bad name on the technology and it gets you, the operator, into trouble. So stay away.
Yeah, those are great points. Now, where can people go to learn where they can fly and where they shouldn't fly when there are emergencies?
For example, when there is a wildfire, the FAA puts out a temporary flight restriction over a certain area, and those flight restrictions are pushed into a variety of different apps as well. So the FAA's app that they have for drone pilots is definitely a good guide to go by if it's a large-scale disaster event. But then let's say there is a fire in a city, in a building. There's not going to be an FAA no-flight temporary flight restriction for that incident. So it comes back to think about what you're just about to do. Is there value added by putting your drone up? Could you potentially cause more harm than not? And if you have to say, no, there's not real value added, and yes, I could potentially create harm, just don't fly. Use common knowledge. I think right now that is very, very important, because the entire industry is trying to really showcase how beneficial the technology is if it's done in a manner that meets the regulations and also the expectations. And so if there are these lone wolves out there going against it, it doesn't help.
That's great, Romeo. And just one final question to wrap up. What message do you most want to leave people about drones and their use?
I think we should all be open-minded to what this technology can do and will be doing in the future. I honestly think we have not even scratched the surface of the possibilities. Just seeing some of the research projects that are being done through academia, not only in the US, but worldwide, is quite amazing. And I foresee that we will be seeing more and more use cases down the road. The technology, as we can see here at DJI, is moving fast. We will continue to push for more integration and for more safety embedded within the platforms. But really being creative and having an open mind can lead to some of these applications that we have not even thought of yet.
That's it for episode 115 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Romeo Durscher of DJI. I want to thank Romeo for taking the time to speak with me and sharing his expertise. If you want to learn more about DJI's education programs or want to connect with Romeo, check out the website at dji.com. And remember, you can meet Romeo in person at Interdrone 2017 on September 6th through 8th. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1 per month, you can help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to patreon.com/Drone Radio Show. Thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.